Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session, Making Smart Choices, a Teacher's Guide to AI Ethics. We're so glad to have you join us either live here tonight or if you're watching the archive. We truly enjoy you joining us tonight. My name is Tom Driscoll. I'm the CEO of EdTech Teacher. We'll do introductions more formally in a second. I'm also joined today by Catherine Atkinson. Catherine, want to say hi to the folks?
Hey everyone.
All right, so let's dig on in. First is just a housekeeping thing. So if you've been to one of our um, past workshops, we are going to share with you the link to get your certificate. So in a couple minutes, we will share like how to enroll and download your certification for getting credit for today's workshop. And we also want to let you know that if you have any issues, like technically with getting access to it, you could reach out to our team at any time, and we will make that happen. All right, but we're going to start with a question. What questions do you have about AI ethics? And we actually have a Q&A feature as part of the Zoom webinar. So feel free to open that. That's what the icon looks like. And you can punch them in now or frankly at any point throughout the webinar. If you have some questions about it, feel free to jump in, ask away. And then myself, Catherine, and Gail is also on the call. We'll be checking that out, seeing who has any questions and responding in time. And also, there's a way that we can take a look at other people's questions and upvote them, right? So if you click the like button on somebody else's, it'll actually rise up, and then we'll be able to see some of the questions that you have. So take a moment to add one of those in. No pressure though, you don't have to if you choose not to. The key takeaways for today. So the first is we are going to explore how AI is a tool, not a replacement. So your role as a teacher is now more important than it's ever been. And then as far as the ethics, we need to model ethical and responsible use because you are an ethical leader. And the way that you use AI in the classroom and you use AI as an educator is going to model for students what ethical and responsible use looks like. And the last is start small, but start now. So navigating AI is absolutely a journey. Anybody who's been exploring this the past few years knows it keeps changing. The direction it's going is shifting. So it's going to take time, but just start small. Start with manageable steps to explore the tool. And then it's going to create a solid ethical foundation of use for yourself and for your students. So this is a quick screenshot. This is the landing page for today's webinar. If you access this directly through, for instance, our calendar invite, you got to our Zoom, that's great. We're glad to have you here. But if you go to the actual link into Skills Build where you log in, you're going to click this enroll button, and then you'll be able to download that certificate. We'll go show you some examples at the end of specifically what to click, but it's an important step. Just make sure you click enroll, and then you get access to that. So, quick background. My name is Tom Driscoll. I'm the CEO of EdTech Teacher. I was a former high school social studies teacher, a digital learning director at a regional school district, a keynote speaker, and an author. My focus and research interests are empowering teachers with technology, AI in education, project-based learning, and my passion project, which is civics education. And I'll also let Catherine introduce herself.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Atkinson, and I'm really excited to be here with you this evening to talk a little bit more about AI ethics. That we have some answers. We won't have all of them because, as you know, AI is technology is constantly changing. But a little bit about my background. So I was in the middle school for a lot of years, and I absolutely loved it. I served as department chair, technology coordinator, worked with pre-service and veteran teachers and different kinds of professional development for ed tech tools. My focus, and it has always been my focus, is meaningful learning with technology. I'm a big proponent of making sure that technology is acknowledged as a tool for learning and not the end all be all. And so I'm positioning AI tools in that same light is how can we use AI to enhance or increase student learning, student understanding, as well as, teacher learning. In that matter as well. So I'm really excited once again to be here with you and to talk through how this is gonna, further my passion.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. Thanks again for being my co-pilot on the webinars. Always a pleasure. About us. So we're going to take just a quick 30 seconds. our mission at EdTech Teacher is to help educators thrive in the classroom. That's what it's been. It's what it's going to continue to be. We're just here to help. So what do? We provide professional development training. We provide live events for teachers and school leaders. And then we also partner with educational technology businesses and organizations to help them design and scale experiences for teachers. That also brings us to our current partnership with IBM Skills Build. This Skills Build program is actually part of that partnership where we're providing webinars and wide variety of training for schools. I'm also going to throw out there that we do provide live training for schools at zero cost as part of this program. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time, and we will get in touch with you about scheduling some live training if you and your school are interested. Okay, so I'm going to kick this over to Catherine to get us started on the webinar.
All right, so we all know, so we're going to start our time together with a scenario that actually might sound all too familiar. And it's a kind of situation that I think any teacher has come across even before technology was integrated into our daily instruction. And we've seen headlines about academic integrity, especially when it comes to AI. But what happens when the technology that's designed to catch cheating actually creates an ethical dilemma? And I think one of the questions that came in the Q&A is I think sort of along that line. I need to think through a little bit more, but I was reading through the second one that came in. So it's just more about, it's more than just a policy, right? It's about balancing our responsibility to uphold academic standards with our fundamental commitment to our students. So the scenario that is posed on the screen here is you receive a student's essay and you run it through an AI detector and it flags the writing as 90% AI generated. And then when you talk to the student swears that they wrote it themselves. I'm sure that we've all sat in this chair at some point, even before AI. Like I said, plagiarism's been around forever, right? So the reflection question is how would you approach this conversation with the student while upholding academic integrity as well as respecting their agency, right? Because we do have some really good writers out there, and AI generated, you know, checking tools, they're not perfect. Okay, so that's just something that we wanted you to just think about, like how would you approach this conversation? Because we've all been there, and if you're still in the classroom, it's gonna come up for sure. So we do have a confidence poll that Tom just launched, and we're just we just are just con we would like to know. Sorry, I can't talk right now. How confident are you in knowing how to address AI ethics with your students? So one is not very yet and all the way up to 4, which means you're very confident in your ability to address AI ethics. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment, and I think it's an anonymous poll. So,
Yep. Yep. All right. Give another 10 seconds or so. Okay, so I'm going to share the results, and it looks like we're about kind of in the middle. Right? So 7% out of 4, 47% out of 3, 40% out of 2, and then 7% at a 1. So that's where we are as a group.
okay. And I hope that by the time we're done with our webinar, that you feel a little bit more confident than where you are right now. And if you're part of the 7%, if you have any tidbits that you want to share, I mean, we're
Yeah.
totally open to that as well. I realize that in a webinar, it's kind of hard for people to just share their ideas, but I do believe that we have the ability, if you raise your hand, we can actually have you unmuted and you can pose your thoughts because, like I said, we're all learners here, and yeah. Consider me a sponge. All right, so now let's go ahead and begin with our why. So why do we need to know about AI ethics at all? So why is a basic understanding of AI ethics essential for teachers and also for students? So on the next screen here, you're actually looking at 2024, 2025 results from a Pulse panel, which surveys high priority education related topics. So in the chart, we have data from public school leaders who reported the percentage of students who were taught about ethical and appropriate uses of AI. So across all levels, so Tom, if you click that, so at high school, middle school, and elementary, only 14% of all students were taught ethical and appropriate uses of AI, with 44% of students not taught about AI ethics at all. Okay, Then the next part of the survey, the percentage of students who are taught about AI ethics decreases as we go down grade levels. So 25% in high school, 21% in middle school, and 7% in elementary. So these results from December 2024 point to the need for us as educators to make teaching about AI ethics a priority because our students are already using AI, even if we don't want them to. Okay, but they just know they are already using it. So but before we can teach our students about AI ethics, we need to take a step back to build our capacity around, well, what is AI ethics? Okay, so where do we start? So for many of us, the world of AI can feel very overwhelming, especially since it's constantly changing. Feel like new things are coming about every day, and I'm constantly on my toes. But we believe that you can tackle any AI ethical question with our simple three-part framework. So on the next slide, we do have a QR code and we have a bit.ly link, and we'll also eventually post this on our IBM Skills Build webpage. But we do have a resource for you. It's called the Ethical AI Use in the Classroom 3P Framework. And it's a foundation for everything that we're going to be discussing today. So this simple tool will hopefully make it easier for you to ask the right questions when it comes to selecting and using AI tools in your classroom. Okay, so in the next slide, this is just a screenshot of what it looks like. So the ethical AI use in the classroom 3P framework will help direct your attention to what matters most when considering the use of AI for teaching and learning. So its purpose, process, and people. And on the following slides, we're going to break down each component. Okay, so for purpose, when it comes to determining whether or not to use an AI tool, we need to consider the purpose for the use. So why am I using this tool? What is the educational goal? Does the tool truly serve that purpose? And does this tool align with my learning objectives? It goes back to my passion, meaningful learning with technology, right? It's not the tool, it's about the learning. Okay, so the next one is process. So once we've determined the purpose, we turn our attention to understanding, well, how does the AI tool work? So is it transparent? Can I see where it gets its information? Does the tool provide citations or links to sources for its answers? And for those of you that have used AI tools before, you may notice that some of those tools are already providing citations, others not so much. And then the last question is, can I see how it reached its conclusion? Now, the last point that we need to consider is the impact of the AI tool on our students. So does using this AI tool enhance my students' learning, or is it simply just a shortcut? Is this tool fostering human connection and critical thinking, or is it actually hindering it? What is my role when my students are using AI? Okay, am I a guide, a facilitator, or just a grader? So these are just some questions to think about that we put together that hopefully it'll help you when you come across an AI tool, think about, well, what's its place, what's its role in learning? Okay, so we just wanted to throw this thought out to you. The AI is a powerful tool designed to augment, not replace human capabilities. And we mentioned this also in our first webinar, and this is going to be a thread that we're going to continue on with the rest of the webinars that we have scheduled for you. It's not going to replace you. It's going to augment what you do. It's going to augment what students are doing. Okay, and I believe now I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. So that framework that we just shared is an excellent way to get started evaluating some tools or some of the resources that you might be using in the classroom. Now we're going to transition to what are some of those core ethical principles that we should really be thinking about when we evaluate anything related to AI in education. And just for some context, we are basing this on the UNESCO AI Competency Framework for teachers. So if you do want to check that out. It's an excellent resource. The teacher competencies and the student competencies are well worth a quick read if you have some time. All right, so let's start with the first, which is the idea around human agency and oversight. This is so essential. So if you look at any of those frameworks from UNESCO, they all start with the idea of human agency. And we know that AI is powerful, but as Catherine just mentioned, it's not going to replace teachers' judgment, nor should it. Really, it's your ability to connect with students, understand their needs, make pedagogical decisions in sound ways. That's all irreplaceable. So that's that human element of teaching. So for instance, like for a tool like an AI-powered grading system, you are the human in the loop, right? So even if you use some type of AI tool to help assist with assessments, you're still deciding whether that final assessment was fair. Was it balanced? Was it a true reflection of your student? You remain in charge. You're the one that's driving. AI is just a tool to assist you. So remember, it starts and ends with the idea of human agency. And then human-centered AI, we talked about this quite a bit during our first session, but it bears repeating because it's so important. It helps to start with human input and inquiry, right? So the AI starts with human direction. You have some type of prompt. It doesn't think on its own. It's a tool that responds to your prompt. So from the first webinar, we talked about how AI works in general, the idea of making predictions based on patterns and data. That's a really important part of this. The second is it then proceeds to the AI product or the output. That's what everybody gets all excited about right now, right? So that's the idea that it drafts things, it creates things, and it's a fantastic way to approach instructional design and various other ways you can use it. But the key here is to view this as output. That's what it is. It's the product of a machine, right? It's never the final destination. And lastly, it concludes with that human piece. So it starts with the human part and then it ends with the human part. So it concludes with human reflections and next steps for learning. And the most crucial part of the cycle, for me, it's just because that's where a lot of the magic happens. That's where a lot of the learning happens, is through the reflection on that experience. So, for instance, some questions that you could also ask are related to the idea of, how can I improve upon this? Is this accurate? Is this biased? Those are the types of questions that we really should be asking about that critical thinking, the analysis, and the actions that are taking after the AI has done its part in the learning process. So just to reiterate, the key point here is that human-centered AI means that humans guide the process from start to finish. And we truly believe that as educators, that should be the approach that we take of using AI in the classroom. So the second principle is do no harm and bias. Right? So AI models are trained on massive amounts of data from the internet. But this can be a problem because the data is often contains societal biases. So we don't need to go too much into the weeds of this today, but the way that these tools are trained, and we'll get into this a little bit later today, a lot of it is pulling from inherently biased information sources. So for instance, if an AI image generator is trained primarily on images of a certain group in a certain role in society, it may struggle to kind of replicate that with another person's role with another profession, right? So that's just some of the things that we can run into. So as teachers, we need to be aware that AI can unknowingly perpetuate some of the biases that we see in society, and that it's our job to check AI-generated content for inaccuracies or stereotypes, and then to also model critical thinking for our students. Some of the best lessons I've seen over the past couple of years are where the AI output is actually the object of study. Like you're actually taking a look at that and breaking it down. Where are the inaccuracies? Where might the bias be? How do we unpack this? And as a former history teacher, I think like there are so many ways to interpret any historical event. Let's just take a look at the last 10 years. Look at how we might be debating all of the things that happened in this decade. So who decides what version of history comes out of this machine, right? So there's a lot of things to unpack with this, and I think that that's also a thing to do is try to evaluate that and actually make that part of a lesson if you're working with students at times. We also mentioned the idea of input influences output. So AI models have historically been trained on massive volumes of data. Like, so basically everything it could get its hands on in the internet. In some cases, um, it was, it's things that were not necessarily behind a paywall, but it was public, so it was publicly accessible. So it started to learn from it. However, a lot of that is from English-speaking Western cultures. So inherently, what we're finding is that a lot of these AI tools can have a Western bias in knowledge and reasoning and in perspective, and we need to acknowledge that, right? Depending on the context that we're using this in and how we're evaluating the tools, that is how a lot of these tools were created, so we need to recognize that. So what to know is that we do need to be aware of unintended consequences from some of this AI use. Now, what could that look like in the classroom? So, for instance, if an AI tool is trained on flawed historical data, it might suggest, for instance, to low income or minority students that it might suggest less challenging tasks for them. Essentially, it can trap them in some type of low achievement track And that's not good. And that was actually brought to light by the Stanford Center for Racial Justice. And that's just one of many studies that are out there that are pointing to some of these different issues that we're seeing with some of the biases that are baked into some of these tools. The next part to consider is the idea of data privacy and security. So when a school or district adopts an AI tool, or even just you individually are just exploring them, it's important to know what data the tool is collecting and how it's being used. This is so important. When I was a digital learning director, that was one of the first things I would ask is what type of information are we sharing with this program? Is it trustworthy? Does it have clear, transparent privacy policies? How does it protect student information? Especially right now, actually, one of the questions that just came in from the chat, is it ethical to upload student work to AI detectors? That's a loaded one. I'd love to address that a little bit later. But yeah, those are exactly the questions that we should be asking before we start to add any type of student information to any of these tools. And finally, we have transparency and explainability, right? So AI tools should be as transparent as possible. Now, I know that that's a little bit tricky because if you ask some of the AI researchers in the world, some of them aren't exactly sure how all of this works, which is kind of crazy to think about. But think of AI as a black box. Actually, later on, Catherine's going to break this down a little bit more for us. But you put something in, you get something out, but you don't always know how it got there. And ethical AI tools should be more transparent, so or as transparent as possible, so that your students can understand how they actually worked. And this is crucial for building trust, and it helps all of us become more responsible users of these tools. So a classroom example, and this is one that's really, um, I wouldn't say controversial, but it's something that as soon as I heard it, I was like, wow, this needs to be shouted from the rooftops. So there was a study in which they took a look at some of the AI-powered grading tools and how they might actually unfairly penalize certain students. So, in an article published by the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, did I say that right, Calvin? Um, they wrote about the significant bias against non-native English speakers. And they highlighted one study that showed over half of non-native English writing samples were misclassified as AI generated, while the native English speakers were not flagged at all. And they actually go in to talk about the reason why it was falsely flagging them, which goes to show that I honestly think most AI detectors are inherently flawed in a million ways, right? I don't think we should really be using them at all, to be frank. But if you are going to use one, that's something that you really need to look at is how is it flagging students? What type of writing is it actually looking at? What research does it have that shows that that is actually from writing? Because especially if we're going to start holding kids accountable for cheating on these things, and we don't even really know if these AI detector tools are legit or not. Most of them aren't. Um, that's an ethical problem, and that's something that we need to address as school systems. It just came up today. I was working with a school, and they were understandably people were asking about some of these things, and I get it. I get why people would want to use them, but right now they're inherently flawed, and we just need to think well about those. Okay, so AI fairness. So I think that a good way to think about this is um, AI fairness is with a simple principle that AI should treat all students equitably, regardless of the way that they're actually using this. And I think the other part of it too is it's about background, how they learn, how they express themselves. Think about like universal design for learning. If these tools just kind of track everybody into one path of how a learner should behave, that is fundamentally against a lot of the ways that we know learning works, that the ways that we teach. So we need to be proactive and guard against this. And it's again, it's not just about the AI tool itself. It's also the impact that that tool may have on a diverse student population, right? Because you have a lot of students with a lot of different needs. Does this tool promote inclusivity, or does it actually narrow the path towards getting an education in school? So definitely something to consider on the fairness piece. So, what you need to be aware of is that AI models can reflect and amplify some of the societal biases found in training data, and that as we start to look through the AI tools for lesson design, for assessment, for all these different use cases, we need to keep this in mind and make sure that it's not unfairly treating certain students differently. So what can you do? First step is to actively monitor how an AI tool's suggestions or evaluations affect different students in your class. A lot of this is through experimentation, asking your students, um, and also the idea of human in the loop, right? So make sure that you're not offloading too many things without having that beginning and end where you're involved in that process. And then you can also look at some of those different tools, the vetting tools, right? So during one of our last sessions, Catherine had the things that you can consider when selecting an AI tool. There are things from Common Sense Media. They actually have classroom tools that use AI. You can go through some of those. But we're actually going to pose a question to everyone on the call today. So I'm sure a lot of us have experimented with these tools. We've seen some of the things that they're great at, some of the things that we need to be careful of. But what are some of the red flags that make you hesitate before you use an AI tool? So we're going to launch another poll right now. This one's going to be open-ended, and it's just going to ask a basic question. What warning signs would make you hesitate to use an AI tool? Give you guys a couple minutes to answer that. I guess as they're answering, just to avoid any dead air, Catherine, what are some of the red flags that you see or that you would really focus on? If you were to just pick one, what would be one of the most important ones?
I think, and we address this in webinar one, is if the AI tool was made specifically for education versus for general use. Because if it's made for everybody, then it's very broad. And as a middle school teacher, I was scaffolding a lot of learning for my students, and I really wanted to have a safe, like walled garden. And so in terms of looking for an AI tool, if it was like, oh, this is for general use, I think I'd be a little bit more hesitant than if it was, for example, a specific tool that was developed preferably by a teacher to be used in the classroom, with my students. So if it's not
Mhm.
educationally focused, that would be my first red flag.
Excellent. All right, so we got a bunch of stuff coming in now. So it looks like we have several responses. So we're going to give you guys another minute or so to answer that, and then I'll take a look at some of the results. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining that. What we'll do is at the end of the session, we're going to have another final poll with some more feedback, and then we'll share out some of our takeaways from that. But thank you all for jumping in and participating. Um, go over here. Okay. So there is a couple things that I did want to jump out. The biggest one that came up, there's actually a word cloud that got generated based on this, and it looks like data, right? So student data was the most common response from everyone that just submitted that poll. Um, yeah, in privacy. Yep, looks like student data, privacy, and then the next one behind that was bias. So thank you all so much for jumping in and answering that poll for us. All right, so let's dive back in here. All right, so from principles to practice, we're going to kick it back to Catherine.
All right. So now that Tom shared about the core ethical principles, let's talk about how do we put them into practice. So it's one thing to know what transparency means, but it's another to model it every day for your students. So the good news is you don't have to be a tech expert to be an ethical leader. You just need to integrate a few simple habits into your daily routine. So first is to develop a basic understanding of how AI works. So you obviously don't need to know the nuts and bolts of how AI tools or models are developed, but knowing how the AI models are trained will help you better understand why certain outputs or responses are given. So the two main tools, AI tools we're talking about are generative AI tools and predictive AI tools. So generative AI creates new content or output. So for example, that would be something like ChatGPT being used to brainstorm different plot ideas for a story, or Adobe Express to create images based upon the prompt that you put in. Predictive AI uses data to identify patterns and make predictions, similar to, for those of you that use Duolingo, because I do, where it's prioritizing concepts based upon what the learner is struggling with. Now, the other thing to think about is to model responsible use. And I know Tom mentioned this earlier, and that's also will be a common thread, I think, through all of our webinars. And the first step is transparency. So just remember that your students are watching you. So if you use an AI tool to brainstorm ideas for a lesson plan or to create a quiz, be open about it, right? I mean, just let them know I used it. This is why I used it. And then also being very honest about any changes that you made or any errors or red flags that came up. Because as I mentioned, we're all still learning as well because AI tools are going to continue to evolve, but it is really important for us to be transparent with our own students. And it also opens the door to conversations about the difference between using a tool and relying on it completely, right? The second one is to cite your sources, even when the source is AI. Now, Tom and I both are history social science teachers, so we're all about sourcing and all about citations. And I know that my students, middle schoolers that they were forced to cite things. And if they didn't, I'm like, well, who said it? Because if you can't tell me, then I don't know how true it is. So the same thing goes for AI. So just teaching your students the importance of being real honest, and this is how AI. I used AI, and then citing the tool. And we do have guidelines on APA, MLA in Chicago on how to
Mhm.
properly cite AI usage with whatever you make, or if you're going to have your students use it for a research project or something like that. But it does reinforce the importance of intellectual property, right, and proper attribution. So it's all woven together. And then finally, to foster critical conversation. So don't be afraid to talk about the limitations of AI, right? You can even just say, I used AI to write something and then I noticed that it wasn't entirely true. This actually happened with even just sources that I was finding on the internet where it looked like it was a legit source, right? And I brought it into the classroom and talked to the students, what's missing here, what doesn't seem right. So that's all about corroborating. It goes back to Tom and I, our shared history social science background, right? And this actually turns AI from a solution provider into a tool for deeper inquiry and critical thinking. So you can take those errors and make it a teachable moment for your students. Okay. All right. So the next one is to create classroom guidelines. And this is where you would need to explain the why behind the what. So instead of just throwing out a blanket statement about don't use AI to write essays at all, explain why you're actually saying that. Or if you're part of the instructional team, like instructional leadership team at your school, having those conversations because you are going to get pushback from some teachers. You might get pushback from students, right? But this actually helps students understand that using AI for every single task can actually hinder their ability to think critically and to develop their own voice, right? Because they're relying on something that we've already talked about is inherently biased and not necessarily correct. So it's all about framing the discussion around skills development, not just avoiding plagiarism. The next one is the role of context. So, we probably have people in our webinar today and who are going to watch it later that you teach elementary, middle school, high school, and higher ed, right? So it's all about context. The guidelines shouldn't be a one size fits all solution. It is really important to help students understand that the ethical use of AI depends on the context of the task, right? So it might be okay to use AI to brainstorm some ideas. It's not good. It's not ethical to use AI to write a final research paper, right? We all know, we talked about plagiarism. We know that, but it's important to give students the scenarios and talk through the why AI is allowed or why AI is not allowed. The next one is digital citizenship. And this is all about connecting AI use to the broader lessons on digital citizenship. And what goes back to what I mentioned before, respecting intellectual property, being really transparent, and being a responsible digital citizen, right? And then lastly, student accountability. So depending on your grade level that you teach, involve students in the process of writing or creating these guidelines, right? Because if you give them some ownership, they're going to be more likely to have that buy-in and follow along with what you're saying. Okay. And it also just definitely empowers students. And that's really what we want out of the whole learning schema anyway, right? AI beyond that. Okay. So the
Just
next thing
one quick thing, Catherine.
sure.
Something came up today, actually. We were t discussing this and we were talking about what does responsible AI use look like? What did that, and I'm like, it reminded me of when, you create your class rules, but you brainstorm together with your class. we should be doing that with responsible AI use, right? Because we don't have all the answers, but the students may come up with some innovative ways to ethically use AI in their workflow, in their class as they learn. So students absolutely should be part of this conversation. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, Catherine.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so one of the strategies that, and this is not something that we create, has been around forever, is the stoplight protocol. And so it's a clear visual way of setting the expectations for your students because it organizes or AI use into three categories: red, yellow, and green, just like a stoplight. And as Tom mentioned, this is a great way to bring students into that conversation. So red light means stop, right? So this is for AI use that is not permitted under any circumstances. So what would be an actual red light for you? What would students say a red light, option would be? And just remember going back to the explaining why, right? So it's protecting academic integrity, it's ensuring students are doing their own original work. The yellow light means use with caution. So this is all about context, right? Where AI use might be conditionally permitted for certain tasks depending on what it is. So you might allow students to use AI to brainstorm ideas, right? But they have to actually cite the tool. And if they don't cite the tool, then that's not right part of the yellow light protocol. The
Mhm.
green light means go. So this is for AI use that's freely permitted for specific tasks. And once again, being real transparent on what is considered a green light, right? So using an AI tool to check for grammar, which I know I've always appreciated. Spell check, I've always appreciated that as well, right? So just putting it out there on, well, what's allowable within certain contexts, and what's absolutely not allowed at all under any circumstances. So this is actually a very easy thing to integrate into your conversations with students, whether you do it in the classroom or maybe even in a larger group like as like a school site. Okay. The last thing is to question and verify. So, as Tom mentioned, we need to approach AI outputs not as a final product, right? It's all about the human in the loop. It is a starting point to a conversation. So, students and teachers should develop the habit of questioning what the AI is putting out and verifying everything that the AI produces. And we've talked about this with our different courses that we've done at EdTech Teacher, is making sure that you can verify whatever it is you're having students do, with any ed tech product. So the same with AI. When AI produces something and it's one of those tools that doesn't cite themselves, right? They're not saying where they're getting it from. Have students do that, take that extra step to find another source that can verify what the AI output is. And that's a really good skill for them to have, right? So they can learn how to fact check information, right? They can actually actively search for biases in the AI's response. So asking questions like, well, what perspective is missing? Whose voice is not represented? I know that I did that with our own textbook. Whose voices are not represented in this particular historical event? So we're helping students develop those critical thinking skills, develop empathy based upon the output from the AI. I also did it based upon the textbooks that my students were reading. The last one is humanizing the output. So the AI's output can be generic, right? It lacks a human voice. So that's why we were talking about the humans in the loop, right? So based upon the response that the AI puts out, the true magic occurs when the human takes it, reflects on it, fine tunes it, adds their own voice to it, and then it becomes a polished product. So that's what we're talking about here with ethical AI use. Okay. All right. Now I think I'm going to turn it back over to Tom to talk about the trust factor.
All right, thank you, Catherine. Unmuting. Perfect. Thank you so much. So we're going to move to the trust factor. So in this section, we're going to discuss how ways and how we can determine if AI outputs are actually trustworthy or not. So we come back to this: transparency builds trust. So if a student gets a specific recommendation, can the teacher or student understand the reasoning behind it? So let's start with reliability. So a reliable AI is one that performs its intended function correctly and consistently over time. It's reliable. So for instance, if you're using um, an AI tool to generate lessons based on a certain set of standards, and every time you have it craft those, it is accurately hitting those standards, and it's doing it reliably every single time. That is a reliable AI tool. But what you need to know is AI is not infallible. It can produce incorrect information or hallucinations, Yes, it is much better now. Like it hallucinated all the time back in 2022, 2023. If you look back at some of the different screenshots, which we include in some of our presentations, it is wild how wrong AI was when generative AI first came out, at least to the public. But it's gotten better over time, but it's still not infallible. It still can have inaccurate data, or just simply fail to function as it's intended. So the problem is that in over-reliance on an unreliable AI can undermine your students' learning and your professional integrity. And I actually caution folks that if you're an expert in a field, I actually think this is less of an issue because you have such incredible background knowledge on that you'll be able to detect when these things go off the rails. Where I think it's problematic is when students use it, or even if you're new to the teaching profession, you don't have a ton of context on this, you don't necessarily know when it's going off the rails. So you have to be even more cognizant to check, right? So my suggestion is that if you're not heavily invested in the topic or have a lot of experience with it, I would definitely be more in tune with this idea of accuracy of the data because you may not have the context to check on your own. So a classroom example would be, say, a grammar checking AI is reliable if it consistently identifies grammatical errors in a document, regardless of who writes it or what the content's about. It does its job as expected without failing or producing random errors. Um, so what to do? So any new tool that you're using or that your students are using, um, well, a little sidebar here. I think AI tools, we're gonna probably stop even using that term pretty soon. And when I mention that to people, they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "There's going to be no AI app. AI is just going to be in almost every app." It's like saying my software connects to the internet. It's like, of course it does, right? So it's like that's going to be like a ubiquitous thing, which means just about any software that you're going to test out now, you really should look for the AI integration and to check that for accuracy and consistency because it is going to be pervasive in just about every platform. It's almost there now. And then also treating AI as that starting point, not the final destination. That's a big part of this. So a lot of times I usually say I got usually two or three prompts minimum before I use some of the output. That's a little bit different workshop. We'll get into the idea of prompting and some best practices, but that's really important and how to model for your students, how to verify information, how to ask multiple prompts, how to ask for the research that points to where they got that information and have a plan B for when an AI tool fails, right? So if you're leaning into AI for a particular lesson, like any good teacher, you have plan B, right? So if you've been in the classroom, you know you need a plan B because things happen. So having that second off ramp where you can still teach the content, teaching the topic, but if something happens with the technology, you can still meet the lesson goals. Now we get to transparency. So an AI tool is transparent if you can understand how it works. Right? So think of it as a window into the AI's brain. So a completely reliable AI that works perfectly every time might still not be trustworthy if you don't know how it makes its decisions. So the lack of an explanation creates uncertainty, and the transparency removes the uncertainty by revealing the logic. So you want to get that transparency if you can, but they are two different sets of questions. So reliability and trustworthiness. So we have reliability questions. Does it work? Is it accurate? Transparency is a little bit different. So it's why did it actually work this way? So yeah, it's great that it worked and it's accurate, but why did it work in this fashion? And then where did it get that information, right? So where did that information or that logic come from that made that decision? Now there's going to be a wide variety of how transparent certain tools will be, if they even can be in some cases. But that is something to definitely keep an eye on. It's not just does this tool work, it's also how transparent is that tool in how it actually works. So, classroom example, a reliable AI tool might consistently identify and correct grammatical errors, but if it's not transparent, you can't tell if it's penalizing a student's non-standard dialect or just making a legitimate correction, right? So that's where there needs to be more transparency in that tool to show why it gave the score that it actually did. So trustworthiness is a broader concept that includes reliability, but what it adds in is ethical considerations like fairness, transparency, and accountability. So trustworthy AI is not only accurate and dependable, but it's also ethical, safe, and aligned with human values. So classroom example here, let's stay on the same theme of the grammar checking AI. So it might be technically reliable, but if it systemically penalizes a student because their writing style reflects a non-standard dialect, it is not trustworthy, right? So that's an example of, it might be technically reliable, but it's biased in its actions and it's not necessarily trustworthy because of lack of transparency. So just a couple things to keep in mind. And now, talking about transparency, going to kick it back to Catherine, and she's going to take a closer look at the idea of the black box and how AI actually functions.
All right, thanks so much, Tom. Okay, so as we shared, it is important for teachers and students to develop a basic understanding of how AI works. So I'm going to talk just real briefly. I'm not going to get into the weeds about what the black box is. Okay, so the challenge, or we, so sorry. So we've established that a trustworthy AI is one that's reliable and transparent. So Tom talked about that, but the challenge is that many of the AI tools that we use today are what we call black boxes. So they perform a task, they give us a result, but they don't show us how they got there. And so this is a problem for teachers because if we can't understand the why behind the AI's output, it becomes an issue of accountability. So a teacher's professional judgment and a student's learning process depends on having that clarity. So we're going to take a look at a real world example. So when a car mechanic tells you that they fixed your engine, you trust them because of their expertise, right? But when the AI gives a student a specific grade or specific feedback, you need to be able to see the mechanics of that decision. So without that, okay, we're left to wonder if the AI is truly reliable and fair. So understanding this is key to being a thoughtful and ethical educator in the age of AI, and it all boils down to the trust factor. Okay, so let's take a look at the black box simplified. So we talked about the human-centered AI, right? You put in the input, might be a student essay, maybe it's a prompt, or whatever, and you get an output. So maybe it's a grade, feedback, or response. But what happened inside that box is, to get from A to B is a mystery. The logic is hidden, it's opaque, and it's hard to question, let alone verify. Okay, so that's the black box itself. Now, some tools such as ChatGPT and image generators use the deep neural network, which is the most complex form of machine learning at this time. So, and Thomas will be the next slide. So in this case, so multiple layers of interconnected nodes. So the deep part process vast amounts of data and they recognize intricate patterns. And this is what allows them to produce highly nuanced and creative outputs. So in this case, the black box covers a larger part of the thinking process. So you can see from this here, there's multiple hidden layers. So regardless of whether the AI tool uses machine learning or deep neural networks, the black box is a problem for all educators. So, and we all should know, so in our classrooms, we don't just care about the answers, right? We care about the thinking, the process, and the reasoning behind it. I mean, for example, the visible thinking routines. Math teachers asking students to show your work, right? So we want to be able to verify that. So that's why it goes back to being able to verify what the AI tool is actually, what's behind that black box. So if the AI tool gives a student a specific grade or specific feedback, both teachers and the students need to be able to see the mechanics of that decision. How did the AI get to that? So basically the reasoning behind that. Okay, and without that, if we don't get that from the AI, we are left to wonder if the output is truly fair and trustworthy. Okay, all right, so I'm going to push it back over to Tom to talk about transparency in practice.
All right. Thanks everybody. We're in the home stretch here. So what does transparent AI use look like in the classroom? Well, there are a lot of examples out there, but the one that we'd like to highlight actually is Conmigo. We're going to take a look at that in a second. But in a recent interview that Sal Khan had with the someone from UNESCO, I believe, the question was, amid fears of AI taking over education, how can you ensure that the environment you've introduced is safe and under meaningful human control? So basically just saying like what are the guardrails that we're putting in place? So where is the transparency, and how can we make that a more trustworthy tool? So I'm just going to jump right to the tool that we're going to highlight here. And the one that we're referencing is Conmigo. If you haven't heard of it, it's Khan Academy's AI tutor. That's a new tool available to teachers and students. And what makes this aligned with some of those transparent practices is that first, Kamigo's student chat history and activity are visible to the teacher. So this is a form of transparency that allows a teacher to see exactly how the AI is interacting with a student, which is crucial for monitoring how these tools are being used in the classroom. So I think step one, trying to find tools that have some of that transparency in the back and forth and the interaction is really helpful. Second is that when it acts as a tutor, it's actually designed to not give a direct answer, right? Instead, it's used in a Socratic style approach, asking guiding questions. So this is a transparent way of showing its work, quote unquote, to students, leading them to the answer rather than just providing it. So a lot of tools do this as well. Actually, like the Learning Coach gem in Gemini, and I think ChatGPT has its own like Learning Coach variation. There are different ways that students can use these tools, so it is more of a way that it's prompting them and asking them questions as opposed to giving answers. And then lastly, it doesn't use student data to train the AI. There was actually a question that came up earlier about, student training of data. So I'm actually not sure where that question went, but it basically asking about like what should we put in, what should we not. So basically, we shouldn't be having any AI train on our student data, right? Let's just start there. Like, no. But that's a question you should be asking. And a lot of the educational AI tools that are coming out now, they're very transparent about it's a one-way street. Like the student data is not going back in. And then just as a best practice, especially if it's a tool that you don't have as like an official license, you shouldn't be putting personal identifiable information in there anyway, right? You should be keeping that information safe and not putting it in these tools to begin with. Okay, so what to do? So select with intention. So look for tools that offer clear explanations or insights into their AI outputs. How does it work? How is it tracking the usage of the students? Can the teachers actually peer in and see what that usage looks like? What data is it using? What is being shared? Those are all things to keep an eye on. In a transparent tool that's trustworthy, we'll be able to answer all of those questions. And then just a reminder of some of those other questions to be asking about reliability and transparency. So say XYZ tool for the classroom works really well and it's very accurate. Well, if they can't tell you how it's working that way, where the information came from, what they're doing with the student data, yes, it's reliable, but it lacks transparency. So I would still really think twice about using anything like that in an educational setting. So, to determine if an AI tool is trustworthy, what we need to do is take on the role of critical evaluator. That is a role that we're going to have to play right now, especially in the era where we're experimenting so much in the classroom. So, this reminds me a lot of like that 2010 to 2012 time frame where like, iPads were in the classroom, apps were coming out. It was like early on in Google Apps. Everybody was trying a lot of different things, and we're kind of entering that same era. But as much as we want to innovate, we need to be careful about vetting this technology and asking those right questions and evaluate them before we just rush to use those in our classes. And I'm going to kick it to Catherine to bring us home.
All right, thanks, Tom. So, as we conclude our time together, we really want to thank you for taking the time to learn about the benefits and challenges of using AI for teaching and learning. And as we all know, and I believe I said it already a couple times, the world of AI is moving very quickly. So, it's our job as educators to stay in the driver's seat. So, hopefully, you will find that our ethical AI use in the Classroom 3P framework will be useful for you. And once again, it'll be on the IBM Skills Build page, so you'll be able to take a look and download that if that's something that will help you figure out, before you even think about bringing an AI tool into the classroom, looking at the purpose, the process, and the people. Now, we do have another poll that we wanted to just share with you real quick. So now that we've spent some time talking about AI ethics, we'd like to revisit how confident do you now feel addressing AI ethics with your students? So it's the similar question to what we asked at the very beginning. So just trying to see if we move the needle just a little bit.
And it looks like we picked up some folks, Catherine. We have way more people answering this one than the first one, so that's a good sign.
That's good.
All right, so we got about 30 seconds. Actually, less. We'll do 10 seconds because we gotta wrap up. 8, 7, 6. All right, wait time complete. All right, look at that. So 79% at a 3, 21% at a 4, and nobody's at a 1 or 2 anymore. So we've all moved up. We've leveled up in the last hour. So good job, everybody.
That's
I'll share the
awesome.
results. Um, All right. So I think that brings us to this. Yep.
Yeah, so we always like to end with a broad reflection question. So we have, spent the last hour thinking and talking about AI ethics, and there's so much more to talk about. So we crammed a lot in. I know I probably spoke a little fast, so my apologies. But we do believe in taking in maybe setting an intention, right? Taking a small step towards communicating what you've learned about AI ethics with others. So the question that we're posing is, what's one thing that you're going to share with a colleague, a student, or a parent that you didn't know before today? So taking the idea that we move the needle today and then moving it in your own community or school or classroom. Okay. And then in Zoom, yes, I think, Tom, we do have one more
Yep.
poll in there, right? What is one thing you're going to share with the colleague? So actually, if you're inclined to share, what's one thing that you're going to take away from today's session that you're going to push out to other people?
All right. And while you guys answer that, I'm going to get to just a couple quick logistics before we wrap. So we have the certificate is available for everyone that attended live or watched the webinar archive. So within the course that in the IBM Skills Build, where if you need the link, we can send it back to you, but it should have been in that registration email that we sent out to everybody. But once you go into the course, you can enroll in it. You just sign up into Skills Build. If you've already signed into Skills Build once, you don't have to do it again. But use that link to jump in. Click on the e-learning tab. Then the key is there's a part that says mark complete. So if you click on that mark complete button, the third step, it'll say how long was this? It'll already have 1 hour filled in. You just click submit. And then you're done. So if you wanted to access your certificate, the last step would be actions, click view certificate, and then you can print that out. And as we mentioned, if you watched this and you're like, Tom, I don't know what you're talking about, or for whatever reason a link doesn't work, just shoot us a message and we'll be sure to issue your certificate to make sure that you get credit for today's session. All right, so thank you for the poll. I think I may have just shared it. Um, I'm not sure if you guys can see the results. But yeah, thank you so much for answering those questions on next steps in the responses. And just to kind of poke a look in here and see what some folks are saying. Oh, it looks like yeah. So one takeaway is proposing AI tools that are transparent and prompting methods. Um, I'll share the link to the recording, looking for red flags, the stoplight. The three Ps, Catherine. Some folks like your three Ps framework. So thank you all so much for sharing, and we truly appreciate any feedback that you can provide as we build out these webinars. And I think, oh yeah, that brings us to the feedback form. So we are in our second webinar in our series. We are still developing this. We're probably going to keep rolling through even past the December date. So we'd love your feedback. So if you could take a moment, that QR code is there, the bit.ly's there. The PDF to this is also in the course. So if you need to go there and access any of the slides or any of these links, you can access that anytime. And as we mentioned before, you can always reach out to us if you have any questions. Our next webinar is going to be a really fun one. So this is going to be preparing students for tomorrow, careers in the age of AI. And this isn't AI careers, it's all careers in the age of AI because this is not people aren't going to be able to just no off ramps here. Like this is impacting everybody. So how can we help prepare students for what careers may look like in the age of AI? That's going to be on October 23rd at 7 p.m. same time. So the registration link is on our edtechteacher.org skills page. Feel free to actually we just put registration live for all of the webinars going up to December. So if you wanted to go in and just any ones that you'd want to go to view, just click that link, get registered, and we would love to see you at some of our upcoming webinars. And then last plug, remember we can provide a live virtual and in some cases live on-site professional development for schools as part of this IBM Skills Build program at zero cost to the schools. So if that is something that you're interested in, we have a diverse team of educators that would love to come work with you in your school. So feel free to reach out to us at any time or book a time directly on that page. All right, thank you all so much. We are just at 8 o'clock. Great timing, Catherine. Any last words for the folks joining our call?
Well, they did put in some questions, and
Oh, good.
I don't think we have time to answer them all, but there was about environmental implications of using AI. So definitely to think about that when we're putting together
Wonderful.
our PD program that we're working on. Thanks for the question about what core educational responsibilities should not be handled with AI, because that's actually something we should probably emphasize more in a revamp maybe of this own webinar. And I think we did answer Matthew's question about is it ethical to upload student work to AI detectors? I think we spent a lot of time talking about plagiarism and things like that. But thank you so much for posing those questions at the beginning of the webinar. We hope that you continue the learning and that we see you soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.